This is the complete canon origin of Marvel's Daredevil by MerryMarvelite. A link to the original video in the description.
Hey heroes, and welcome to another fearless episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an event of your choosing over at patreon.com/MerryMarvelite.
Oh, I already don't like him. He's starting off very weak by begging for money right out of the gate. Not a fan.
The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. The story of Daredevil really begins with his father, a boxer from Hell's Kitchen known as Battling Jack Murdoch. Jack had a relationship with a Catholic woman named Margaret Grace, or Maggie, which resulted in the birth of a baby boy, Matthew Michael Murdoch. Matthew's mother left while he was too young to remember, but
I should say, I like Daredevil. I think Daredevil's cool, but my knowledge of him is very basic. I know he's a blind dude who got splashed on by some, like toxic goo or whatever, and that made him blind, but also have superpowers. It's about as far as I know, and I think Ben Affleck played him at one point.
Been conflicting.
And my brother and me, and we watched that, and then he drank too much red Kool-Aid, and he threw up on the way to Arby's.
Regarding the exact circumstances of those events. In a story based on Jack's recollection, Maggie left him sometime before Matthew's birth, with Jack unaware that she was even pregnant. Maggie returned months later with their newborn baby, explaining that she had run to the church where the sisters named the child Matthew. According to that story, Maggie believed that they had sinned against God, implying that Matthew had been born out of wedlock, or even that Maggie was already a part of the nunnery. Jack begged her to stay, but Maggie left him with their son and returned to the church, where she eventually became Sister Maggie. Now, there are some issues with this version of events, notably that other sources indicate that Jack and Maggie were indeed married. A more recent account from Maggie herself indicates that she lived with Jack for some time, often taking care of Matthew while Jack was on the road. However, she suffered from postpartum depression at a time when little was known about the condition, and it was often dismissed out of hand. Okay. Without treatment, her anxiety and depression only grew as her own mind betrayed her, making her feel like she was a terrible mother and person. Eventually, this shifted to fear, paranoia, and even resentment towards Jack and Matthew, and she began to feel neglected. Which all came to a head when she attempted to attack her husband and child in a brief fit of madness, coming to her senses after she slipped on a dropped plate of food and felt...
This is actually a... this is a very, very topical thing to talk about right now, dude. There's this whole thing going on with that lady, and oh god, dude, so I don't want to get too into it because it's just horrifying. The whole thing is horrifying, but this lady kills her kids, and then a bunch of girls donated almost $1 million to her Patreon to help fight the legal battle. It's kind of disgusting, kind of sickening.
Fell to the floor. Mostly uninjured and deeply ashamed of what she'd tried to do, she ran away and never looked back. Escaping to parts of the city where nobody knew her, she was determined to not be found and was eventually taken in by the church. According to this story, it was after that when she changed her name to Maggie, which does fit with other sources reporting that she was originally named Grace Murdoch. Now, there is another notable variation in which Maggie fell into depression and joined the church after giving birth to her and Jack's twin sons. Yeah, in that story, instead of Matthew Michael Murdoch, it was Matt and Mike. However, that story comes with a major caveat, in that Michael Murdoch didn't originally exist, and I don't just mean in the sense that he was retconned into the story. I mean that Michael was artificially created years later as an adult and subsequently used a reality-altering relic called a Norn Stone to rewrite history and...
Why does Marvel always got to do this? What is happening here, dude? They just can't help
give
themselves.
himself an origin story. Maybe we'll come back to that notion another day, but for now we'll focus on the original timeline in which Matthew was an only child raised by a single father. Now, much like the circumstances surrounding his birth, there are multiple contradictory accounts of Matt Murdock's childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, making it difficult to construct a canon timeline that is both cohesive and comprehensive. For the purposes of this video, we'll be deferring to official handbooks when it comes to reconciling these kinds of differing details and establishing an order of events, while occasionally pointing out some of the more glaring examples of differences between tellings.
Damn, he's
now,
gonna go
as
in
mentioned
depth, okay.
earlier, Maggie left when Matthew was too young to remember, and so Jack told Matt that she had passed away, and that she wanted her son to study hard and get a proper education.
That's
of
smart.
course, what Jack truly wanted was for Matt to live a better life than the one that he did. He did what he could to support his son, and at one point Jack Murdock took a job as a pro wrestler using the masked identity of the
Okay, so he wasn't a boxer, he was a wrestler. Okay, that makes sense. Come on, I press play. I press play. What are you doing here,
Red Devil. Around 4 or 5 years old at the time, Matthew saw one of these matches when he followed his father to the venue, and while he didn't actively remember this, it seems that the design of the costume stuck with him subconsciously. In any event, Jack hated the idea of fighting in costume and swore never to do so again. Matt, on the other hand, idolized his father, but Jack told him that if he ever thought about following in his footsteps, he'd beat the notion out of him himself. Sure enough, several years later, when Jack caught Matt training at the gym, he strapped on his boxing gloves and gave him a few jabs in an attempt to prove that Matt didn't have it in him to fight back.
Damn.
A stubborn Matt,
That's pretty
however,
rough.
continued training in secret, and while he found it difficult to strike the punching bag, he eventually overcame his misgivings. As a youth, he grew increasingly adventurous and daring, but never got caught and maintained the facade of a quiet, studious child. Battlin' Jack Murdock,
he was a
meanwhile,
bad
continued
kid.
his boxing career at Fogwell's gym, although he admitted he was
Damn,
already
dude.
past his
Look at the stogie on that guy. Hell yeah, he's got a fat stogie.
prime. As such, to ensure that he could continue to support his son, he eventually signed a contract with the
Damn, they all
fixer
do.
Roscoe Sweeney.
That guy's got
Now,
one
I will
too.
note that exactly when Jack Murdock first started
And that
working
guy.
for the fixer is
Damn.
one of those details
They're
that
all
varies
smoking.
wildly depending on the version of the story. But in any case, it seems that their arrangement involved Jack working as a reluctant enforcer for Sweeney, who ensured his cooperation by
Jackie
threatening
boy.
Matthew. Meanwhile, despite Jack's best efforts, Matthew occasionally got into scraps with other kids. At one point, Matt returned home proudly declaring that when another boy took a jab at him, Matt had hit back,
Hell yeah.
causing the bully to back off. Frustrated and possibly drunk, Jack struck Matt before breaking down into tears and regret. Shocked that his father had hit him, Matt ran out
It
into
looks
the
like he
city
full-on
to
punched
think.
him.
In the end, he came to the conclusion that if his father, the man he idolized and loved, was capable of wrongdoing, then anyone was. Deciding that the rule of law was required for a functional society, Matt dedicated himself to studying the law, setting him on a path that would lead to his eventual career. Now, I do want to take a moment to discuss whether or not that was the only time Jack ever hit Matthew. There are some
so we've
sources
got
like
some tellings that say yes, some tellings that say no.
Daredevil Father and the
Probably.
Battlin' Jack Murdock miniseries that paint Jack as an abusive parent. However, Matt himself has since stated that his father never laid a hand on him. Now, we don't do a lot of theorizing on the channel, but I would personally reconcile all of that by assuming that any depiction of Jack hitting Matt was in reference to that one incident, and that Jack instantly regretted his action and never struck his son again after that. Although ultimately this is just one of those inconsistencies that
sense.
changes depending on the story being told. Heck, even the name of the bully that Matt hit changes in different stories.
So is Daredevil kind of like a Batman type where they just want to tell the origin of him again and again? Because that's what it seems like.
But in any event, between his father's insistence on him sticking to a schooling and his own decision to study law, Matt was left with no time to socialize, and other children relentlessly bullied him for being a shut-in. One in particular, a boy named Nate Hackett, saddled
Look at those faces, dude.
him with an ironic nickname that caught on like wildfire, and soon all the kids in the neighborhood began to jeeringly refer to him as Daredevil.
That's a sick
According
name.
to one account, this name was inspired by the gimmicky devil identity that Jack Murdoch begrudgingly used at a low point in his career. Upset and embarrassed, but not wanting to disappoint his father.
Nah, dude, that's like if your friends walked up to you and started calling you Dragon, and you were actually. We had a buddy who, unironically, we called him Nighthawk for years in high school, and he never once was upset about that. I remember when it happened, he walked up to meet one of our buddies, whose name was this dude's actual last name was Bane, so we called him Bane, and he walks up. And he's like, "What's up? My name's Bane." And the dude goes, "Hey, I'm Taylor." And he goes, "No, your name's Nighthawk." And from that moment on, we just called him Nighthawk.
Matt continued his habit of sneaking off to the gym, where he regularly vented his frustrations. It was apparently during this time that Matt first caught the attention of a blind, old martial arts master known simply as Stick. Now, his backstory is something that we may delve into another day, but the important thing to note is that Stick was a member of the Chaste, a mystical order of warriors that dedicated itself to holding evil in check. Furthermore, despite being blind since birth, he had honed his other senses to the point where he had developed a sort of proximity sense, allowing him to quickly detect the details of his immediate surroundings. While Stick quietly watched from the shadows, Matt Murdoch's secret training paid off as he built his strength and proved himself to be naturally athletic. However, Matt's life changed forever the day he saw a blind old man who was attempting to cross the street step into the path of an oncoming truck carrying radioactive materials.
Wait.
Making a snap judgment, Matthew leapt into the street.
So he blinded himself, saving a blind guy? What's the message there? What? What's up?
And pushed the old man out of harm's way just as the truck swerved to the side, narrowly missing them both. As it turns out, that would be the last thing Matt Murdoch ever saw as the canisters of radioactive material fell from the careening vehicle, one of which broke open and spilled across Matthew's eyes, permanently blinding him.
Yeah, fuck blind people except Daredevil. He's cool. That's the lesson. It seems like that's the lesson here. Is fuck blind people. Don't save them. Or else you'll become blind. An eye for an eye. How about both? You know. How about 2 eyes for
hospital, where he and his father learned of his condition, and while he was otherwise uninjured, it seems that the radioactive waste had affected him in other ways. His other senses were quickly heightened to superhuman levels, and the increased sensory input, the loud sounds in particular, were painfully overwhelming. During his time
in the Ben Affleck movie? Oh, hell yeah, dude. Hey, people make fun of it, but I always had fun watching the Ben Affleck movie. I watched that when I was a kid. My little brother drank too much Kool-Aid and threw up on the way to, actually, I think it was at Rally's.
Hospital, he was visited by Sister Maggie, who helped soothe his pain, although he was unaware of who she was. Maggie told Matthew that his enhanced senses were a blessing, but had him promise to keep them a secret, and as she spoke, Matt felt the shape of the golden cross pendant hanging from around her neck. After being discharged from the hospital, Matt attempted to resume his secret training, but initially found it difficult to maneuver without his sight.
That's what it's all about, is the action scenes in the comic books. He said it's dumb, but the action scenes are great. Spoke to childhood me. That's exactly how it should be, dude. We need more dumb, fun action scenes. Honestly.
After this, that Stick finally revealed himself and decided to take
dumb, fun action inside of comic. Dude, this is my hot take on the whole Marvel and DC fuck up that happened, right? This is why Marvel is, like, even though it's, it's still kicking, but it's struggling to maintain its relevancy now. And why DC has never been able to kick off is because they literally did it opposite. Marvel has always been the serious, darker take on comic books, and DC has always been the more lighthearted, campy take on comic books. And then they started making the movies, and Batman, they wanted to make him dark and gritty. And so they took the dark and gritty side, DC did, even though they should have been goofy. And Batman was good, but, it kind of set up them for that. And then Marvel had to go the goofy route with their universe. They have a little bit of seriousness, but it's mostly like PG goofy. So they both ended up picking the wrong sides, and now DC's trying to take itself seriously, and Marvel's trying to be all funny when it should be the exact opposite. Honestly, if you had Dark Marvel where Wolverine was walking around and slicing people, and like the Cyclops was thinking about whether or not he should cheat on his wife and kill his mentor, or the Fantastic Four struggling to stop Doctor Doom from enslaving the entire planet, literally, like these would be cool things. I don't know. And then DC being campy and, Batman could be dark, but then you need like not Spider-Man, my bad, Superman. Superman needs to be like goofy and campy and over the top, and then like Green Lantern. I mean, these are goofy characters that are Martian Manhunter. I don't know. These are funny. This is fun. This is a fun universe, but they're taking themselves so seriously. Depends on the DC comic, though. It does, but generally speaking, yeah, no. I mean, and they could have their couple of dark movies, just like Marvel would have, a couple of goofy movies. Like the Deadpool movies would still be made, I think, the same way in the dark Marvel universe. I think Deadpool would remain unchanged. So, like, you'd still have your certain movies that kind of balance it out. Did you watch Luke Cage? I didn't really like most of the Netflix stories. Honestly, I tried to watch the Daredevil one. I didn't really get into it. And then they made like Jessica whatever one, and I just tuned out. I watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for like 3 seasons, and then found out it was all just made to be a Captain America tie-in. And it was like, and it also spoiled the Captain America movie, weirdly enough. So I don't know. I kind of tuned out there mostly. They nailed Luke Cage, where... Yeah, I mean, I'm not really interested in anything Netflix is doing these days, for sure.
Young Matthew under his wing. Under his guidance, Matt learned to focus his senses, filtering out the noise while becoming more aware of his surroundings. And while Stick may have been a harsh and unrelenting master, Matthew soon became a formidable fighter and acrobat. Furthermore, Matt learned that he had developed a unique radar sense, allowing him to detect solid objects up to 100 feet away. While this has been described as a form of echolocation, it's also been theorized that Murdoch's brain may generate a form of electromagnetic energy.
Oh my god!
So
this is why you say fuck Cyclops, is because you're all about Blind Boy over here. I see.
Similar effect without needing to use actual sound. Of course, it's entirely possible that both are true, and that Matt's mental perception of reality is based on a combination of these
Luke Cage. Oh, okay, word. You're all about big man. Hell yeah.
Other factors. In any event, he also kept up his academic pursuits, learning how to read Braille relatively quickly. After graduating from high school, he was accepted into State University, where he met a man that quickly became his closest friend, Franklin Foggy Nelson. Of course, Jack wanted his son to attend an Ivy League school, and sure enough, Matt and...
Wait, did that guy meet a blind person and then tell him his nickname is Foggy? Is his whole friendship based off of fucking with Daredevil? Like, oh yeah, dude, my name's Foggy Nelson, dude. Like, what?
Foggy soon decided that Columbia better suited their goals, and both transferred there in their freshman year. It was there that Matt met a political science student from Greece named Electra Nachios, who he was quickly infatuated with.
Her name is Electric Nachos? Okay, alright, I love Daredevil. This might be the best comic book of all time.
Elektra was initially
I would fall in love with Electric Nachos too. Honestly. You know, especially if I was like, "Oh, here's my best friend. I'm blind. Here's my best friend Foggy and my girlfriend Electric Nachos." Like, I'd be like, "All right, dude. I don't believe you." Like, "No, dude, I swear she goes to a different school."
interested in his advances, but Matt quickly displayed his acrobatic prowess, revealing that there was more to him than met the eye. However, that went both ways, and suffice it to say, Elektra's story is another one we could easily dedicate an entire video to. For now, I'll simply state that, unbeknownst to Matthew, she was a former student of Stick, briefly training with him when she was a child. However, Stick believed that she had too much anger in her and abandoned her.
That's
Believing
crazy.
Elektra to be capable of great evil, Stick warned Matt to stay away from her, but of course Matt did not listen.
She'd
And
have to
over
be
the next
blind to
year,
reject
he
him.
and
Oh my
Elektra
God.
engaged in a passionate romantic relationship. Then, however, there was an
Nice.
incident in which Elektra and her father, the Greek ambassador Hugo Nachios, were both taken hostage by a group of...
No. Her dad's name is Huge Nachos. So we got Electric Nachos and Huge Nachos. Blind guy with the best friend, Foggy. And then the guy who trained him how to fight with sticks. And guess what his name is? His name is Stick. Holy fuck, this is the greatest comic book series of all time.
unidentified
What the hell?
terrorists. Wanting to save her, Matt made a makeshift mask out of a red scarf and infiltrated the building where
Oh
she
my
was being
God.
held. However, when Murdoch knocked one of the terrorists out of a window, the police mistakenly believed that the hostages were being executed and opened fire,
Hell yeah.
inadvertently hitting and killing Elektra's father.
Oh, no, not Huge
Overwhelmed by
Nachos.
grief and her own darker urges, Elektra broke off her relationship with Matthew, claiming that she would return home to Europe. That, of course, would prove to be a lie, but you'll have to let me know in the comments if you want to hear the rest of Elektra's story. In the meantime,
You know he already making that, dude. He doesn't care about the dog. That's comment bait. It's nice comment bait, though. I like it. It's pretty well done.
Matt was accepted into Columbia's law school, but the memories of his time with Elektra proved too painful, and he ultimately transferred to Harvard with Foggy. Meanwhile, despite being in his 40s, battling Jack Murdoch began to see renewed success in his boxing career, causing some news outlets to give him the ironic nickname Kid Murdoch. Of course, this was due to his arrangement with the fixer Roscoe Sweeney, who secretly controlled the outcome of every match he was in. This all came to a head when Jack was set to step into the ring at Madison Square Garden in a key match against Crusher Creel, who at the time fought under the alias of Rocky Davis.
He kind of just spoiled what he's about to say by showing that still a second ago that said he was shot in the ring.
Jack was eager to compete, but Sweeney ordered him to take a dive in the first round, revealing that all of his victories leading up to that match had been fixed. Naturally conflicted, Jack went to Foswell's gym to think and caught sight of a masked man pummeling
Unless
a
I'm wrong.
punching bag, little suspecting that it was his own son. At the same time, the fixer sent several of his men to ensure Jack's compliance, but when the hired goons attacked the aging boxer, the masked Matthew intervened. In the ensuing scuffle, Matt took a punch to the right side of his face, but succeeded in defending his father and escaped before he realized who he was. Then, when it came time for the actual match, Matthew sat in the audience with Foggy right by his side. And so when the time came to take a dive and lose the match, Jack Murdoch got back up, wanting nothing more than for his son to be proud of him.
Hell yeah.
Furthermore, when he noticed that the side of Matt's face was bruised, he realized that he was the one who saved him from the fixer's men. Inspired by his own son's strength and bravery, and realizing that Matthew didn't need his father to protect him anymore, Jack unleashed a flurry of powerful blows on his younger and stronger opponent, and in the end, battling Jack, Murdoch was declared the winner by knockout, while Matt and Foggy loudly cheered him on. Of course, Jack was fully aware of what that meant for him, and later that same night he was ambushed, attacked, and ultimately killed by the Fixer and his men.
Yeah.
Now, I will take a moment to note that exactly when Jack Murdock was murdered is another detail that is different in some versions of the story.
Well, we're seeing it from Matt Murdock's point of view, and he's blind, so...
Notably, the Man Without Fear miniseries places this event earlier in Matt's life, before he went to college and met Foggy and Elektra. However, this contradicts multiple other sources, including the original Daredevil #1. Now, I don't want to bog down the video by getting caught up in the minutia of that kind of thing, but
I feel like the oldest lore always wins, unless the newer lore is, like, picked up by every person, if the fandom is like 80% yes on the new lore that counteracts old lore, that's whenever then the new lore takes over, which that's happened with Warhammer 40k. But most of the time, like, because the original Rogue Trader was wild, but most of the time I feel like the original lore always wins.
Are curious about the differing versions of the story, I'll leave a pinned
original Rogue Trader had non-xenophobic empire
comment with some more details. Now, naturally, Matt was distraught after the death of his father, and while he was consoled by Foggy, he was further enraged when the legal system ultimately failed to bring the Fixer to justice. More determined than ever to do his part to help people find justice, Matthew graduated summa cum laude from law school, finally fulfilling the promise he'd made to his...
What did he call him? What did he call him? A summa cum laude?
Father.
Oh, God.
Of course, he still wasn't satisfied with how things had ended with the Fixer, but then, after opening his father's old footlocker and finding his boxing gear, Matt was hit with an idea. Using the yellow boxing robe and other materials, he stitched together a costume that he could use to disguise himself while taking the law into his own hands. By this point, costumed adventurers like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four had begun to appear, and so Matt, remembering the mocking nickname he'd received as a child, created
that's crazy that Daredevil is a mocking nickname to him. Like, anybody, dude... It's like if they walked up to you and they're like, hey, who's that over there? And they're like, that's badass. Yeah, that's badass over there. And then everybody just calls you, walk past, what's up, badass, Be like, oh no, I'm so mad that they're calling me that. Like, oh, who's that? That's Don't Fuck With Me Dan. Yeah, he's the strongest, craziest dude here. And then you talk to him, he's like, like that. That's crazy. No, Daredevil's a sick nickname.
Colorful identity of his own, Daredevil, the Man Without Fear. He also crafted a unique weapon for himself, a multi-purpose billy club that could easily be disguised as a regular walking cane. Using this new identity, Matt began tracking down the men responsible for his father's death and attacking them, finding the Fixer in Fogwell's gym. Two men, Mikhail and Gillian, were found by the police badly beaten and confessed to the murder of Jack Murdock, claiming that his ghost had attacked them. Another, a man by the name of Slade, was convicted and sentenced to death, as he was the one who actually pulled the trigger and killed Jack Murdock.
Nice.
Roscoe Sweeney, the Fixer himself, attempted to escape.
So Daredevil does arrest him, but he doesn't get out of it. He's still sentenced to death. That's pretty sick.
Fleeing into the subway, but the strain of the situation proved too much for the aging criminal, and the Fixer suffered a fatal heart attack, dying on the scene.
Actually, this just canonically means that Daredevil is tied in with Death Note, and this is whenever, post L, whenever he starts doing stuff outside of Japan a lot. In
the midst of all of this, one member of the Fixer's crew, a man named Angelo, managed to slip away, but Matt wasn't willing to let him escape. Donning a less eye-catching disguise, Matt followed his target into a brothel on the east side, but when he did, the women working there mistook him as a threat and attacked en masse. His senses overwhelmed, Matt began to lash out, inadvertently shoving one of the women, Lila Hughes, out of a window, seemingly killing her.
Oh,
Horrified by what he had done and overcome with regret, Matt tried to run to Stick for guidance, only to find that his old teacher was gone. As it turns out, Stick was aware of Matthew's vendetta and the supposed death he'd accidentally caused, and decided that Matt was too undisciplined and emotional to be of any use to the chased. I will note, however, that the woman actually survived, and in fact Lila Hughes was merely an alias for the pyrokinetic mutant Mary Walker. But for more of her tragic story, you can refer to my video on typhoid.
Why? Okay.
Mary, linked in the description.
It was all
Regardless,
a test, man.
Matthew truly believed that he had caused an innocent person's death, a notion that tortured him. Leaving everything he knew behind, he moved...
It was all a test and it wasn't even true and we're not going to tell you and you failed. You failed, Matt.
...to Boston, where he found work at the law firm Sussman and Castro. Within a few months, however, he was sent to New York on an assignment, and while he initially did so begrudgingly...
The sus man is working with Castro, while the blind guy's best friend works for... Blind guy works for them, his best friend is Foggy. He dated Electric Nachos, whose dad was Huge Nachos, and they were trained by Stick in how to do stick fighting. Alright, Daredevil.
A visit to his old neighborhood of Hell's Kitchen brought back many fond memories.
Hell's Kitchen is his literal neighborhood.
He have a run-in with some local thugs and was forced to defend himself, which he easily did. Over the following weeks, he reunited with Foggy Nelson and helped his old friend with a class action lawsuit against a corrupt slumlord, helping to remind Matt of why...
What's his name? Slum John Bill? Slum John Bill Man?
He wanted to become a lawyer.
Slum John Rinse Dude?
In the first place. In the midst of all of that, Matt took a visit to the closed-down Fogwell's gym, where he met a young girl who called herself Mickey and claimed to be an orphan, but in truth had simply been using the gym as her own personal hideout. Mickey quickly took a liking to Matt, and the two shared the space to work out, with Matt becoming something of a mentor figure. Then one day, Mickey was abducted and held captive by a child slavery ring, one controlled by the kingpin of crime, Wilson Fisk, who was in the midst of his meteoric rise to power.
Dude, alright, the Kingpin is the sickest villain of all time. I love that he's a menace to multiple different heroes.
Donning a makeshift black costume, Matt leapt into action once again, and quickly tracked down Mickey's captors.
Oh, Matt, but what if you accidentally push someone out a window that turns out to have been a mutant and not gotten hurt and also done it on purpose?
Defeating them and saving the young girl. In the aftermath of that, the Kingpin was left to ponder the name that the masked man had referred to himself by, Daredevil. Matt, meanwhile, lost his job for failing to report back, but knew that there was no way he'd be returning to Boston regardless. Instead, he and Foggy decided to make good on plans they'd made in college and to open their own law firm. With a loan from Foggy's father and a coin flip deciding the order of the name, the two established Nelson and Murdoch, attorneys at law. And before long, Foggy also hired a secretary by the name of Karen Page, who both men were quickly smitten with. At this point, Matt Murdoch had realized his true calling. He would use his position as a lawyer to help people and bring justice as best he could, but when the legal system failed, it would be Daredevil who made things right. And of course, before too long, he got involved in the wider world of the Marvel Universe, in and out of costume, as Matt Murdock was hired on retainer by the Fantastic Four and became their official lawyer. He also faced a number of costumed villains, including some with superhuman powers, like Electro and the Purple Man. In the midst of all of this, there was still one loose end, however, as Matt knew that the Fixer was working for someone else, but didn't know who. Despite being on death row, Slade refused to talk, but before too long, Matt tracked down Sweeney's boss, a crime lord named Alexander Bond, who had been active in New York for decades. He confronted Bond as Daredevil, but it seems that this was mostly for his own satisfaction, as the feds had already gotten the proof they needed to arrest Bond and put him away for over a decade. As a final bit of icing on the cake,
and I bet he's not even going to be allowed to have a bond.
Bond attempted to hire Matt Murdock to represent him in court, but Matt was able to deny him due to a conflict of interest, as Foggy was already representing the tenants of a Clinton apartment building who were suing Bond for trying to break their lease. Although ironically, Bond's arrest and imprisonment also contributed to the rise of the kingpin Wilson Fisk, who quickly cemented his position as New York's preeminent crime lord. Of course, this was only the beginning of Matt Murdock's career, both as a lawyer and as Daredevil. Before too long, he improved his costume both in form and function, cementing his iconic look, and the rest, as they say, is history. Alright heroes, that's all I've got for you this week, but
that was a crazy video. I think that Daredevil might be the most comic bookiest comic book character of all time. Every character in his entire backstory is ridiculous, to the point to where you can't even laugh. You just have to take it seriously. It's amazing.